Hi everyone, my name is Sumant Kumar from Some Thoughts Online, and today we will be going through the second chapter in the history textbook for 10th standard CBSE students, which is Nationalism in India. If you haven't already gone through the videos on the first chapter in this series, which is the rise of nationalism in Europe, I would recommend that you go and check out those videos first and come back to this one so that you'll have a better understanding. You can use the links that I've put in the description below. We begin this chapter with the situation in India after the First World War. So the situation in India after 1919. Another thing that we introduce this chapter with is the return of Mahatma Gandhi from South Africa. We will be learning about the introduction of the non-cooperation movement and about the ideology of satyagraha or non-violence as well. So let's begin. India was a colony of the British Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. The growth of modern nationalism in India is closely connected to the anti-colonial movement. People discovered their unity in the process of their struggle with colonialism. The sense of being oppressed under colonialism provided a shared bond that tied many different groups together. But each class and each group felt the effects of colonialism differently, and their notions of freedom or their ideas of freedom were not always the same. The Congress party under Mahatma Gandhi tried to unite these different groups under one movement. However, this unity did not emerge without any conflict. In this chapter, we will pick up the story from the 1920s and study the non-cooperation movement, like I said, and we will also be touching upon certain aspects of the civil disobedience movement. We will explore how the Congress party sought to develop national interests and how different social groups participated in the various movements that were organized around the country. We will also be learning about how nationalism captured the imagination of the people. We're going to begin the first part of this chapter, namely the First World War, Khilafat, and non-cooperation movement. After the First World War, the national movement spread to new areas. It incorporated new social groups and developed new modes of struggle. The war created a new economic and political situation and led to multiple issues. It led to a huge increase in defense expenditure, which was financed by war loans and increasing taxes. Customs duties were raised and income tax was introduced. Prices doubled between 1913 and 1918, which led to extreme hardships for the common people. Forced recruitment of soldiers from villages also caused widespread anger among the populace in the villages. In 1918-1919 and in 1920-1921, 2 consecutive years, crops failed in many parts of India, and this resulted in acute shortages of food. All of these adverse situations were accompanied by an influenza epidemic, which also managed to kill a lot of people in many areas of the country. As you can see, the people of India suffered greatly at this time, basically between 1919 and 1921, because of various different causes. According to the census data of 1921, 12 to 13 million people died as a result of famines and the influenza epidemic. Thus, food shortages and the disease were the main cause of deaths at this time. People hoped that their hardships would end after the First World War, but unfortunately, their hardships never ended at all. At this stage of hardships for the people, a new leader emerged, and he suggested a new mode of struggle against the British colonialists. Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in January of 1915. He was in South Africa, where he had successfully fought against the racist regime with a new method of mass agitation, which he called satyagraha. The idea of satyagraha emphasized the power of truth and the need to search for the truth. It suggested that if a cause was true, if the struggle was against injustice, then physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor. Without seeking revenge or being aggressive, a satyagrahi could win the battle through non-violence. This could be done by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor. People had to be persuaded to see the truth instead of being forced to accept the truth through the use of violence. By using a non-violent form of struggle, truth was bound to triumph or gain victory. Mahatma Gandhi believed that this dharma of non-violence could unite all Indians. Satyagraha was a novel method because in the past oppressive rulers were overthrown using very violent means. This was the first time that a person sought to appeal to the conscience of their oppressor and to unite people through non-violence. After arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized satyagraha movements in various places. In 1917, he travelled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. Later in 1917, he also organized movements to support the peasants of the Kheda district of Gujarat, who had been affected by crop failure and a plague epidemic. The peasants of Kheda could not pay their revenues and were demanding that revenue collection be relaxed in that year. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize another movement amongst the cotton mill workers. Immediately after arriving in India, Gandhi began organizing peaceful protests against the oppressive British government. He travelled to places like Champaran and Kheda in 1917 to introduce the idea of non-violent protest among the plantation workers in those places. Then he organized a similar movement in Ahmedabad among mill workers. All of these people belonged to the economically poor or backwards classes of society, and Gandhi sought to unite them in their struggle against the British using his non-violent means of protest. The Rowlatt Act was passed under the presidency of Sir Sidney Rowlatt, who was the head of the Sedition Committee in 1919. This act had been hurriedly passed through the Imperial Legislative Council despite the united opposition of the act by the Indian members. It gave the government enormous power to repress political activities. It also allowed the detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Mahatma Gandhi wanted non-violent civil disobedience against such unjust laws, and he wanted to start this off with a hartal on the 6th of April in 1919. The Rowlatt Act treated all Indian nationalists as if they were terrorists, and it gave the British authorities a huge amount of power to detain any suspected persons for a long period of time. Gandhi was against such unjust laws, and he began the first major movement against it in 1919. Rallies were organized in various cities against the Rowlatt Act. Workers were on strike in railway workshops, and many traders closed down their shops. Alarmed by these popular protests and scared that lines of communication such as the railways and telegraph would be disrupted, the British administration decided to clamp down on the nationalists. Local leaders were picked up from Amritsar, and Mahatma Gandhi was barred from entering Delhi. On the 10th of April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, which provoked widespread attacks on banks, post offices, railway stations, and other government institutions and other government buildings. Martial law, or rule by the military, was imposed in Amritsar, and the infamous General Reginald Dyer took command of the forces in Amritsar. The Rowlatt Act was extremely unpopular, and many workers, including merchants and traders, began to stop work and close their shops and close their establishments. This scared the British, who began to arrest many nationalists in response. The situation in Amritsar especially became very dangerous as the police began firing on peaceful protesters, which in turn led to more attacks on government buildings and against government institutions. The military took over command in Amritsar under General Reginald Dyer, which led to one of the darkest moments in the Indian freedom struggle. On the 13th of April, the infamous Jallianwala Bagh incident took place. On that day, a large crowd gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh. Some came to protest against the government's new repressive measures, while a lot of others had actually come to attend the annual Baisakhi fair. Being from outside the city, many of the villagers were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. General Dyer entered the area along with his troops. He blocked the exit points and he opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds of people. His object, as he declared later, was to produce a moral effect. General Dyer wished to create a feeling of terror and awe in the minds of the Satyagrahis. His men opened fire on the peaceful gathering, which included many people who weren't even protesting, including a lot of women and a lot of children. This incident led to an eruption of protests not just in Punjab but all across India. Around 400 people died in the massacre and several thousands of people were also injured. General Dyer was removed from his post by the British government after this incident, and he was widely condemned in both India and in England as well. As the news of Jallianwala Bagh spread across India, crowds took to the streets in many towns and cities, especially in North India. There were strikes, there were clashes with the police, and there were attacks on government buildings. The government responded to all of this with brutal repression. They sought to humiliate and terrorize people. Satyagrahis and non-violent protesters especially were forced to rub their noses on the ground, they were forced to crawl on the streets and to salute all of the sahibs. People were flogged or beaten in the streets and villages. And Gujranwala in Punjab, which is now in Pakistan, was bombed with artillery fire. Seeing this violence spread, Mahatma Gandhi called off the movement entirely. The increase in uprisings and protests, which led to attacks on government buildings and led to brutal tactics used by the British to repress the protesters, made Mahatma Gandhi feel that all of this was completely unnecessary. Many nationalists were humiliated on the streets, and some regions also faced military strikes. All of this forced Gandhi to call off the movement against the British for the time being. The Rowlatt Satyagraha had been limited mostly to cities and towns. Mahatma Gandhi felt the need to launch a more broad-based movement in India. He was certain that no such movement could be organized without bringing the Hindus and the Muslims closer together. He decided to take up the Khilafat issue as well. The First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey, and there were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, or the Caliph, who was the spiritual head of the Islamic world. To defend the Khalifa's temporal powers, a Khilafat movement was formed in Bombay in March of 1919. Gandhi knew that the Hindus and the Muslims needed to come together for a satyagraha to be successful. He took up the Khilafat issue as many Muslims were passionate about it at the time. The Ottoman Emperor was called the Caliph and he was the religious head of the Islamic people. His temporal power was the power that he could exercise over the state institutions in Turkey and around the Ottoman Empire. A young generation of Muslim leaders like the brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali began discussing with Mahatma Gandhi about the possibility of a united mass action on the issue. Gandhiji saw this as an opportunity to bring Muslims under the umbrella of a unified national movement. At the Calcutta session of the Congress in September 1920, he convinced other leaders of the need to start a non-cooperation movement in support of Khilafat as well as Swaraj or independence. By giving importance to the Khilafat issue, Gandhi sought to create a united movement for independence from British rule, and he sought to unite various groups from all across India. In his famous book Hind Swaraj, which came out in 1909, Mahatma Gandhi declared that British rule was established in India with the cooperation of Indians. He stated that the British Raj had survived only because of this cooperation. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse within a year and Swaraj or independence would come automatically. Gandhiji proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. It should begin with the surrender of titles that the government awarded. People should boycott all British institutions such as the civil services, army and the police. They should also boycott institutes like the court and legislative councils. They should also let go of government operated schools and colleges. One of the major boycotts should have been made against foreign made goods and products like clothes. If the government used repression or violence, a full civil disobedience campaign would be launched. Through the summer of 1920, Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali toured India extensively, mobilizing popular support for the movement. British rule in India was enforced by only a handful of British officers who were tasked with overseeing the large colonies and princely states. If the people did not cooperate with them in their daily lives, such as by purchasing their goods and by boycotting or refusing to participate in their institutions, then the British would have no choice but to accept the demands for a free and independent India. Many leaders of the Congress party were concerned about these proposals. They were reluctant to boycott the council elections which were scheduled for November of 1920. They feared that the movement might lead to popular violence. In the months between September and December, there was an intense struggle within the Congress leadership. For a while, there seemed to be no meeting point between the supporters and the opponents of the movement. Finally, at the Congress session in Nagpur in December of 1920, a compromise was worked out and the non-cooperation program was fully adopted. The members of the Congress were concerned because of the possibility of violence and popular unrest that might grow unchecked if non-cooperation movement took off. However, they worked out their differences and adopted the program in Nagpur in 1920. We will now be learning about part 2 of this chapter, namely the differing strands within the movement. We will see how non-cooperation meant different things to different people and how this difference in opinion led to violence in various regions around India. The movement started with middle class participation in the cities. Thousands of students left government controlled schools and colleges. Even headmasters and teachers resigned from their posts. Lawyers also gave up their legal practices. Council elections were boycotted in almost all the provinces except for in Madras, where the Justice Party, which represented the minority non-Brahmin community, wished to enter the council. They believed that this was at least one way of gaining some power, and power was generally concentrated in the hands of the Brahmins at this time. The educated middle class population in the towns and the cities led this non-cooperation movement. They gave up their posts in government-run institutions, and most council elections were boycotted as well. The Justice Party in Madras didn't wish to boycott the elections because they wished to gain at least some political power and representation for the minority non-Brahmin community in Madras. The effects of non-cooperation on the economic front were more dramatic. Foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops were picketed, and foreign cloth was burnt in huge bonfires. The import of foreign cloth halved between 1921 and 1922. Its value dropped from a huge 102 crore rupees to almost half its amount at 57 crore rupees. In many places, merchants and traders refused to trade in foreign goods or finance foreign trade. People began discarding imported clothes and they began wearing only Indian clothes. Production of Indian textile mills and handlooms went up as a result. The economic effects of the movement were immediately noticeable, especially in the textile industry. Most merchants and traders refused to sell clothes which were mass produced in British mills. They instead began selling more khadi and other indigenously produced textiles. The movement in the cities gradually slowed down due to many reasons. Khadi cloth and Indian textiles in general were often more expensive than the mass produced mill cloth, and poor people couldn't afford to buy them. Thus, it couldn't be boycotted for a very long time. Similarly, the boycott of British institutions also posed a problem, as there were no alternative Indian institutions, such as Indian colleges, Indian schools, Indian courts, etc., which were set up in place of these old British institutes. Indian schools, colleges, and courts, like I said, took up a very long time to come up. Students and teachers began returning to their old schools and colleges. Lawyers and administrators as well began to return to courts and to government offices. The movement was very short-lived in cities as there didn't exist any alternative avenues for employment, especially for those working in these government institutions. Cloth was a major factor, like I said before, as Indian textiles were more expensive and poor people obviously couldn't afford to purchase them very easily. We will now be looking at how non-cooperation movements spread in the countryside and the villages by studying about the situation in 3 different places. We'll be studying about the situation in Awadh, we'll also be studying about it in Andhra Pradesh and in Assam. In Awadh, the peasants were led by Baba Ramchandra, who was a sannyasi, and he had been to Fiji earlier as an indentured labourer. The movement here was against talukdars and landlords who demanded exorbitantly high rents and a variety of other payments from the peasants. Peasants had to do a form of service called begar, which is forced labour, and worked at the landlord's farms without any payment. They were tenants and they had no security of tenure over the land. Basically, they didn't even own the land that they worked on. They would be regularly evicted so that they couldn't acquire any rights over their leased land. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of begar or forced labour, and social boycott of oppressive landlords. In many places around Awadh, bands were organized by panchayats to deprive the landlords of the services of even barbers and washermen. The peasants here were treated very harshly as they were constantly harassed by the landowners who were called talukdars. They wanted to abolish the old practices and demand a reduction in taxes. As you can see, here the non-cooperation movement wanted to integrate itself with the peasant uprisings that were already underway. This was done to achieve greater awareness and participation and also to spread the ideas of a free and independent India among the villages in Awadh. In June of 1920, Jawaharlal Nehru began going around the villages in Awadh by himself. He began speaking to the villagers and was trying to understand their grievances and their problems. By October, the Awadh Kisan Sabha was set up, which was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra, and a few other educated people in the area. Within a month, over 300 branches had been set up in the villages around the region. So when the non-cooperation movement began the following year, the effort of the Congress was to integrate the Awadh peasant struggle into the wider non-cooperation movement. The Awadh Kisan Sabha was set up to address the needs of the peasants and the farmers in that region. Nehru was sent by the Congress to speak with the village leaders and to integrate their struggle with the struggle at the national level. So you see how they are taking small struggles in specific regions and trying to integrate them with a wider struggle that is happening at the national level itself. The peasant movement, however, developed in forms that the Congress leadership was unhappy with. As the movement spread in 1921, the houses of many talukdars and rich merchants were attacked. Various bazaars and markets were looted and grain hoards were completely taken over. In many places, local leaders told peasants that Gandhiji had declared that no taxes were to be paid and land was to be redistributed among the poor. Obviously, Gandhiji had never specified any such things. Gandhi's name, as you can see, was being invoked to sanction all actions and aspirations by the local leaders. The leaders in Awadh began to sanction violent actions against landowners and against local merchants who were very wealthy. Many crimes were being committed and the local leaders were invoking Gandhi's name to justify all of the wrongful actions. We will now be looking at the tribal movements in Andhra Pradesh, where a militant guerrilla movement had begun to develop. In the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, a militant guerrilla movement spread in the early 1920s, which was not a form of struggle that the Congress approved at all. Here, as in other forest regions, the colonial government had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering the forest to graze their cattle, to collect fuel, or to collect fruits. Obviously, this enraged the hill people. Not only were their livelihoods being affected, but they also felt that their traditional rights over the forest, such as to collect fruits and to collect wood for fuel, were being denied. When the government began forcing them to contribute begar or forced labor as well for road building, the hill people began to revolt. The person who came forward to lead them was a very interesting figure. His name was Alluri Sitaram Raju, and he claimed that he had a variety of special powers. He said that he could apparently make correct astrological predictions, he could heal people, and he could also survive bullet shots. The government wished to repress the militant uprising by the tribal people in this region. They used guerrilla warfare, which is used when a small group of people use hit and run tactics against a much larger army or a much larger force. The British began to take away their rights over the forest land and force them to perform unpaid labor such as road building. The people had no choice but to take up arms against the oppressive government, at which time a famous leader, namely Alluri Sitaram Raju, who was commonly called the hero of the jungle, came forward to lead the rebellion. Captivated by Raju, the rebels proclaimed that he was an incarnation of God. Raju spoke about the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi and said that he was inspired by the non-cooperation movement. In fact, he even persuaded people to wear khadi and to give up drinking. However, he believed that India could only be liberated by the use of force, and he didn't advocate non-violence. The Gudem rebels attacked police stations, they attempted to kill British officials, and they carried on guerrilla warfare for achieving Swaraj or independence. Raju was captured and executed in 1924, and over time he became a folk hero. The people in this region believed Raju was a god and they began following him. He spoke about Gandhi's ideals, but he always said that violence is necessary to gain independence. His followers attacked government institutions and used militant tactics to achieve their goals. We'll now be moving on to the struggle faced by plantation workers in Assam and their interpretation of non-cooperation movement in their region. Plantation workers in Assam were unable to move freely in and out of the confined places that they worked in. They wished to be able to return to their villages and visit their families from time to time. Under the Inland Emigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens without permission, and this permission was rarely given to them. When they heard about the non-cooperation movement, thousands of workers defied the authorities and they left the plantations and started heading back to their villages. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their villages. Unfortunately, they never reached their destination as they were stranded due to a railway and steamer strike. They were eventually caught by the police and brutally beaten up. The plantation workers in Assam were forced by the government to remain within enclosed spaces of their plantations. They were not even allowed to visit their families on most occasions. Thus, when they heard about the non-cooperation movement and about the hartals being organized by Gandhi, they left their work and began to head back to their villages. However, they didn't expect that the non-cooperation movement would also affect transportation services as well, and they were left without any means to return home. The visions of these movements were not defined by the Congress program or by Gandhi himself. The people in all of the various regions interpreted the term Swaraj in their own ways, imagining it to be a time when all suffering and all their troubles would be over. Yet when the tribals chanted Gandhiji's name and raised slogans demanding a Swatantra Bharat, they were also emotionally relating to an all India agitation. When they acted in the name of Mahatma Gandhi or linked their movement to that of the Congress, they were identifying with a movement which went beyond the limits of their immediate locality. It's evident from the stories that we have heard about Awadh, about Arunachal Pradesh and in Assam that different people had different interpretations of Swaraj. It was not the same idea that the Congress had at the time, and it was not the same idea that Gandhi also had at the time. What is important to understand, however, is that all of them had a similar idea of connecting their local movements to a wider nationalist movement, like I had mentioned before. This allowed them to think of the regions beyond their own localities. And with that, we come to an end to this first part of the chapter. Today we learnt about the situation in India after the First World War and the causes that led to the general unrest in 1919. We also saw how Gandhi returned to India and began organizing protests and movements in various regions, and how people began to unite for the cause of an independent India. We learnt about the use of satyagraha or non-violence to counter the unpopular Rowlatt Act of 1919. We have also seen how Gandhi tried to unite the Hindus and the Muslims by taking up the Khilafat issue. Finally, we studied about the outcomes of non-cooperation in the towns and in the cities and in villages in various regions around India. Thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. I've been Sumant Kumar, and once again, thank you so much for watching this video.